Welcome everyone to this yet another episode of Voice of Healthcare Incubator series, the Startup Street, where we have taken an initiative to interact with our esteemed set of mentors and panelists, and just with an engaging discussions just to understand what all may be the common FAQs that our experts would be able to answer for our audiences. My name is Khushbu Sharma, and again, I welcome all of you all who are joining us today. Today, I have the pleasure of having with me Mr. Davesh Manocha. He's the managing partner at CDM Capital, which is an early stage fund. Davesh has a rich 20 years of global experience with leading institutions and investments in the M&A transaction space. Prior to starting CDM Capital, Davesh was a partner at a mid-market private equity fund where he had spent almost a decade. And prior to getting into private equity, he has also an wide range of experience such in sectors such as technology, investment banking, and I'm sure there are much more that probably we'll learn throughout the conversation. So, Davesh, thank you so much for your time today. It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm sure we have so much brewing discussions that are on our way. So, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks, Khushbu. My pleasure to be here. And thanks for the kind introduction. You could have even said that I have been all over the place and I wouldn't have taken offense to it. So, yeah.
No, I mean the more diverse, the more better. I think for or our audiences also, so that they have more amount of probably the venture outing technologies that we have. So to begin with, Davesh, as we mentioned that while we were talking also that the entire interview series of engaging with all of our mentors and advisors is just with a single objective is to how can we just make a list of common FAQs and make the journey of our newer entrepreneurs that are just right there and trying to venture out a little bit easier, just to give away a few tips and advices from all of your experiences. Uh, but before starting, and while we talk about challenges, experiences, learnings, we would just want to understand about your journey specifically, Davesh. Now, while we were talking, we know that you have been into engineering, you have been into technology, and you eventually now have ventured into CDM Capital. You were into private equity, investment banking. So, how has your journey been so far, and what led to one thing? So, over to you.
Sure. Well, I mean, to put it simply, the journey has been enriching. Um, I think I'm no exception. I think it happens with many engineers like me who start off in technology role, but then at some point in their lives, they either become interested in some other career path or decide to start something on their own. Something similar happened to me while I was working in the technology sector. My interest started developing towards investing, and that was primarily in public market investing. Slowly, that interest graduated to self-education, which is again a very natural course of action. Then I did my MBA. I think one while whatever you learn at MBA and then the academic degree helps you in getting the qualification for investing roles, which happened in my case as well. So right after my MBA at NUS Singapore, I moved to financial services space, started working with the Macquarie Group in Singapore, primarily investing in real estate. Then the whole 2008 happened when real estate as an investment class ceased to exist. So I moved to a more generalist role, joined, moved into investment banking. That was in Middle East. And then obviously ended up joining a private equity fund in India, where I spent the last decade. So it's been a very enriching experience as far as CDM Capital is concerned. I think it's a very natural progression. Once you work in a fund, then the next step, if you want to be on your own, is to start your own fund, which happened in my case as well. Especially in my last job, as over the last few years, both my interest and my investing experience started gravitating towards early stage. So I launched CDM Capital last year, which is an early stage angel fund focused on seed Series A investments, primarily in three sectors: health tech, fintech, and SaaS businesses. So that's been my journey, and yeah, I would not trade it off for anything else.
Understood, understood. And as you very briefly mentioned, yes, you've been, I think, associated with a lot of sectors out there, starting from being an engineer to then venturing out into financial services, investment banking, and now eventually to CDM Capital, which leads me to my question, where I think since you said that you now have an extensive experience, you've been in the space of finances and investments pretty long now to understand that now what is the mindset of, let's say, just a early stage startup who's just starting to understand the science of raising fund. Number one, who doesn't know, understand primarily that, okay, what goes behind, what is the homework and work that goes behind actually raising the fund. And I think a CDM Capital would be there to make them their journey at least a little bit smoother and understand. So yeah, since I said that you've been dealing with a lot of such let's say founders minds, what according to you are the most important factors you look out when you are making the decision to invest in a startup? That's one. And I'm sure that as we always say that the journey from ideation of a startup till execution is the longest one. And I'm sure that there are not all the startups which actually end up successfully. There might have been lot of ideas that probably drop down in the line. So what do you think might be one reason that leads to the failure of such companies even after raising a fund? Over
Sure.
to you.
Yeah. So, Kushbu, a couple of important things. I think when it comes to evaluating startups, one is the usual set of response you would get. You would have heard it at the times, and all of that is absolutely relevant. You want startups are eventually a shadow of the founders, right? So, most of the time is invested in evaluating the founders. Hopefully, there are more than one founders. You would expect them to bring complementary skill set to the table. um, Ideally they should come with past experience in the same sector that they are building a startup. So I think those founder related points are absolutely critical. But I think apart from these things, few of the important classical professional skills also become very important. You would expect the founders to be detail oriented, because
Mhm.
what happens in a startup is that the going is never smooth. You will always have some rough days, some bad fortunes for the companies. You are bound to face those things. What happens with good founders is that they're able to take the burden on themselves of thinking through the twists and turns that they will face in their business, and are honest about it. Because investors like us could very easily get carried away, just like founders, on the market trend, the valuation, whatever is happening in US, etc., etc. But good founders know the pulse of the business much better than any other investor, right? They usually don't need much education in terms of what to do, especially when the things are not going their way. So I think that's one quality we often look for in founders. To your other question of why many companies do not succeed even after raising initial round, there's not, I wouldn't say there is one reason. There are multiple reasons. I mean, few of them that I could mention. One is that what often happens is that you know there's a journey which happens from once you develop a product, you find the right product market fit, and then you build a business around it, right? Now what often happens is that you have built a good product and you raise too much capital too soon. Then you start trying to build a business around it without finding the right product market fit. So I think that is one reason why I would say many startups, even after raising funding, struggle, because business building has to follow the right product market fit and not the other way around. Second, like I said, raising too much capital too soon could just put you under undue pressure, because once you raise excessive capital, then you want to show traction, then you want to justify your valuation. All of it's almost like riding a tiger. You can't get off it, you can't stop it. um, Third, another important factor that at least I have seen is that many times one startup raise capital, they do excessive hiring, right? I think,
Hmm.
don't get me wrong. I mean, hiring is important, but if you try to hire too many people and build a very big team without setting the right culture in, that could be counterproductive. Because the idea is that you hire 10 good people, they will deliver something, but it doesn't happen that often, because if there are 10 fresh people, no matter how capable they are, they may often get confused working in a very chaotic environment where there are multiple people working on the same task. So I would say that's another reason why a few of the startups fail. Finally, I would say, which is not always a founder's mistake or startup mistake, is underestimating the competition, because what usually happens is there are always some very well-funded startups out there. You may have a unique product, unique idea, unique service, but everything is replicable. So the well-funded startups may be able to replicate your product and hit the market by undercutting prices, or spending more money on marketing, and then it becomes a game of the last man standing, which is a function of how deep your pockets are. Now, that's something that is not always in your control, but it often leads to startups struggling, because at the end of the day, unless you have a meaningful market share, it's very difficult to scale up a business. So yeah, these would be few of the things I would I would assume that could result in startups not succeeding even after raising some initial capital. I'm sure there are many more, but that's been my experience.
Understood, understood. And yes, I'm sure that there might be many more, but the few ones that you just mentioned, it's pretty evident that any sort of a startup, or let's say a founder or a team of founders, need a proper set of guidance, and a proper set of market research that has to be done before venturing out, well they are in whatever industry that they want to venture, be it healthcare or non-healthcare. Which brings to my the next segment, where now there are incubators out there globally who are actually creating an ecosystem for so many startups out there. What Voice of Healthcare Incubator has done is that we have tried to build a specific ecosystem which is only for the healthcare startups minds out there, and with all the stalwarts and minds like yours, the overall idea is to just make the way, and not and try not them and try not to let them face all of these problems that you just mentioned. Let's say not understanding what is my go-to market, or not making an extensive research out there, or not understanding the competition that's already there in the market. So how do you think Voice of Healthcare has created a difference, or intends to create a difference, VOH incubator out there in the market, to all the healthcare startups out there, and how can startups specifically benefit from ecosystems like these?
Sure, sure. Uh, I think specifically talking about healthcare, right? I mean, the sector needs help and innovation at all levels, right? I think it's a secular sector; it's never going to go out of fashion. And the opportunities to build companies within this industry will always be there. Of course, medical treatment has made some astonishing advances over the past few decades, but it has all come at a cost, right? It's not very consumer friendly when it comes to medical treatment, and especially in a country like ours, where significant percentage of people either do not have insurance or inadequate insurance, they end up paying the medical expenses out of pocket. So, so there is a lot of room to do innovation in this sector, but at the same time, healthcare sector is a little different from other industries. As we talked about product, building a product, then finding the right market fit, and then building a business around it. The journey from product to product market fit within healthcare, and specifically health tech, is significantly longer than other industries. And part of the reason is that there are just so many stakeholders involved, starting with the patient or customer, to doctors, to hospitals, to insurance companies, to regulators, which is the government of the day. Ideally, you would end up needing to get buy-ins from many of these stakeholders before you could commercialize your product or technology. Right? And I'm talking about more on the enterprise side and not the consumer side of the healthcare, um, which is, I would say, resonate more with the consumer industry than the healthcare industry. So you may develop a great product which would be clinically superior to whatever the hospital is today using, but that does not translate to hospitals adopting your product, because clinical validation is one part. For a for a hospital to replace what they're currently using with your product would mean capital outlay, either in the form of capex, opex, doesn't matter. Unless the hospitals see the ROI stacking up against the expense that they are making, they are very unlikely to adopt something new, right? And part of the reason is because hospital revenues are capped by whatever agreement they have with the insurance company for different procedures. So for them to adopt a new technology, unless it gets netted by incremental revenue, it is a big step, right? And that's where my point becomes relevant, that you need buy-in from several stakeholders before you could commercialize your product in the health tech space. Now, I think voice of healthcare in particular, having someone like Dr. Naveen, who started this, who himself comes with the experience of running a tertiary or whatever super secondary hospital, and then running a primary care health tech firm. He he knows the ecosystem very well, right? He has dealt with different kind of players within the ecosystem. So that is where I would assume the voice of healthcare, along with a capable team like you people and the ecosystem that it has, it could significantly add value to the early stage healthcare companies. Just for example, just building on the example I was just saying, if they could connect these companies and help them get the feedback from the right stakeholders while they are in the product development stage, just help them in developing the right product, pricing the product right. So I would assume that Voice of Healthcare is a very unique platform that way, because the startup incubation platform is just one of the many things, but there's a larger ecosystem that you guys cater to. So I would assume that startups could gain significant advantage from partnering with people like you.
Thank you so much, Davesh. Yeah, I'm sure that while you mentioned about the fact that, connecting the industry and connecting the ones who are just starting out to the ones who are already experienced is one of the biggest things. For example, I have an idea in my mind in, let's say, a cardiology space. Connect just, my connection and the opportunity for me to talk to some stalwarts who are already out there and made a mark, and now probably into a phase of reaching to heights, is something that values the most, specifically for the early age startups. So yeah, that's what we are striving to do at Voice of Healthcare Incubator, just to make those connections, and just to make our connections leverageable to the ones who are, the first cohort ones. So yeah, that's something that we are trying to do, and thank you so much for the kind words. Moving
Absolutely.
on, while we are towards the conclusion of the session, you mentioned a lot about challenges. You mentioned a lot about the few maybe factors as per you which probably might occur in a failure of an early age startup even after a seed fund. Um, is there a piece of advice that you would like to give out to the early age startups who are trying to find a place for their product or a service in the market, or seeking venture capital investment in their startup? And I'm sure there might not be one, there might be many, but yeah.
Sure, sure. I would say the first thing is, my suggestion to any startup is to solidify your business plan, right? I mean, I see many startups who do not have a business plan in place, or they would have outsourced it to the banker. Um, if the founders themselves are not sure of how the revenues or expenses are going to look like in the future, then how can an investor get some conviction around it? Right? I mean, at the end of the day, investors do want to see a fairly clearly roadmap on how you intend to use the fund, how you grow your business. We all know that things do not work out the way that you anticipate, but at least having a plan of action in place is extremely important, because India is not a market where the ideas work. It's the execution that counts. Second, I would say, one should be sure of how they want to capitalize the company and what exactly is their funding requirement. What usually happens is that, especially in the early stage, seed, pre-series A startups, if a good investor comes on board, and there are several other investors who want to co-invest, all of a sudden the round size increase from 1 to 4 mil. I don't think that that's the right way to go about it for the startup. They should be very clear in their head that what is the exact capital that they need, and what are they going to demonstrate after raising that capital. Um, Third, I would say, especially in the recent context, is it's important that the founders to be transparent and honest. I think every investor appreciates transparency and honesty. One should be upfront about the challenges one may face and the risk involved, and it just helps you build credibility with the investors. Finally, I would say, which is more of softer factors. One has to be patient, has to be persistent, has to be determined. Nothing big has ever comes easy. So a little bit of grind would do no harm. Um, and few sleepless nights, few days without any money in the bank will just help you build your character. I think as a founder, you end up dealing with a lot of stakeholders, from investors to employees to partners, your clients, which often means that you will get plethora of advisors, right? Uh, there will be a lot of opinions, and everyone has an opinion, right? But I think good founders stay focused. They don't get digressed by the opinions that they are getting. It's important to be flexible. Some tweaks and turns are always required in any business, but it's important to stay focused and not lose, sorry, and not lose focus on the exact business that you started with. So I would say those would be few things that would help any startup in raising capital.
Thank you so much, Davesh. I'm very sure that all of these advices and factors would be very helpful to the viewers that our audience is. Thank you so much, Davesh, for your time today. It has been a pleasure to talk to you, and it was an interesting interaction. And we look forward to much more. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Khushbu. Take care. Thank you.